going to be years before we finally know how well or how badly the government has done. I mean, there will be an inquiry into it, but the bare facts are that there's been an 11% hit to gross domestic product GDP. That's the worst recession that the UK has had since the 1709 Great Frost Fair. That gives an illustration of just how bad the economic damage is. And the death toll has been, the death rate, so deaths per million, has been one of the worst in the world. There's been more than 120,000 deaths by the government's own preferred measure. It's more than 140,000 deaths if you look at people where coronavirus has been recorded on the death certificate. So by those measures, it's clearly been very, very bad indeed for both the economy and the death toll. So when emergency measures were put in place in March 2020, there wasn't a way out necessarily. It was just, this is a crisis now. We need to really control cases as much as we possibly can. And it wasn't known what the end point would be. As it was, cases declined because people were moving around less. And we had last summer a summer of relative normality, but then cases, of course, spiked again. And then that got even worse once this new variant, the more transmissible Kent variant, became prevalent across the UK. And so what the new roadmap is, it sets out a clear set of staging posts, but there's a 5-week gap in between so that they can be measured to see whether there is an impact on the spread of the virus. And the government has been very clear, and Boris Johnson has said that this is a cautious and irreversible approach. He doesn't want to have to do what he did last year, which is ease the lockdown, only to then have to reimpose a lockdown. And he had to do that in the end, 3 separate lockdowns. So twice he eased the lockdown and was forced to reimpose it. He doesn't want to have to do that again. He wants this to be the last lockdown. He has been guilty of over-promising and under-delivering at times during this pandemic. What we've seen with things like his promise of a world-beating test and trace system, which struggled on its launch. He promised game-changing antibody tests, which haven't changed the game at all. And then, of course, there was the U-turn over relaxing restrictions at Christmas. I think he's learned from that. We see in the current roadmap for easing the lockdown that he is, if anything, trying to under-promise, and then he can over-deliver if everything goes according to plan. So I think he's learned from that. But I suspect, actually, that when the next general election comes around, the dark days of the pandemic will be quite distant by that point if we have succeeded in leaving restrictions, if the vaccine programme has been a success, and if the economy has recovered. Those are the things that will actually matter to voters when they cast their ballots in 2024 or whenever the next general election happens to be.